say this. The Bryce Underwood era has begun. Yes, of course, college football officially kicked off over the weekend, and we have much to discuss regarding the Michigan Wolverines and the Michigan State Spartans, who started their seasons with victories. Both teams are 1-0 to begin their respective campaigns. And, of course, we are going to talk about the first-place Detroit Tigers, who continue to move ever closer to their first American League Central Championship in 11 years. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, I want to get some show notes out of the way. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani 2014. We are on TikTok. Those numbers are consistently going up, so follow for all the TikTok updates. If you like this podcast on YouTube, you can hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We are available in audio form on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create, so keep an eye out for that. All right, I'm going to start with the Tigers here, and that may be a bit surprising considering college football kind of rules the world, but I'm only going to start with the Tigers because I have the least amount to say about the Tigers. It's going to be one of those rare weeks where I don't have a ton to talk about necessarily. A 2-4 week, though, kind of deceiving because they won 2 out of 3 against a divisional opponent on the road in the Royals. They're now 9.5 games up. The Tigers have dominated the American League Central Division this year. And I think even going back, I think it was 2023 even, they played very well against their division. That's so important. And I know it's not as important as it used to be because you don't play as many games, but you still play a lot of divisional games. And these are still opponents that you become very familiar with. Tigers took care of business. They won the Scooble start. They had a really good comeback victory in the Paddock start on Friday. Annoying Saturday game where they left guys on and Holton gave up the home run to Bobby Witt. But as a whole, Tigers are now it's just kind of the waiting game. Like, just keep treading water and you're in a position to do something you haven't done in over a decade and maybe even go beyond that. I mean, they do, as of the time of this recording, have the best record in the American League. But they did run into a bit of a bugaboo when they got swept by the Athletics, the name redacted Athletics, in this at the beginning of the week. And, you know, I'm trying to with the Tigers. And I put some of this on me and I put some of it on the organization that inflicted so much pain on us for the better part of a decade, where I'm trying to shake the feelings of the past. And this is something that I talked about with the Lions for so long, where if this truly is different, if the culture is different, if everything is different here, then when things go sideways, we can't no longer assume that they won't be corrected. You know what I mean? Like in the past with an organization like the Lions, if something went wrong, you know, that paper cut would turn into a gaping flesh wound, right? That's not what real organizations do. Real organizations fix things, they draft well, they develop well. And with the Tigers, I feel like I should be better at maintaining that same mentality of, hey, you know what, they lost a series or they got swept, and not saying to myself, oh my God, we're going to cough up the division, which is like that 12 out of 13 loss stretch, that scarred me because it's like, what if that's the real them? I think this week has continued to prove what I think this team is, which is a very good regular season team that I just don't think has the depth in their pitching department to be able to make a really deep run through October. Now, I'm going to keep pointing this out because I say this about every team every year, but you know, I have my issues with the pitching staff, especially the starting staff after Scooble. No, they're not going to need to be good for 162 games. Come October, they're going to have to be good for several weeks, and weirder things have happened. And you have hit the ultimate home run of home runs at the deadline by going out and getting Kyle Finnegan, who has not only not given up a run for you, but hasn't come close. His whip is under a half a base runner per inning. Like, he's basically averaging 1, 2, 3 innings. He's being brought in the highest leverage situations. His pitch mix has changed. He's thrown more splitters. He's just pitching with a ton of confidence. And that's the last point I'll make about the Tigers today, which is back when we were really good the first time, because we are good again, but I'm talking in the Dombrowski years, there would be those times where we would sign a guy, trade for a guy who was, okay, whatever. And they came here and they just flourished. Doug Fister was a good pitcher who became a great pitcher when he came to Detroit. Anibal Sanchez was a solid pitcher who won an ERA title once he came to Detroit. Omar Infante was a fine player who became a 300 hitter in 2013 with Detroit. You know, when teams have the right system in place, they are able to get the most out of players. And right now, let's face it, ever since that championship in 19, the Nationals have been trending downward. They've got some pieces, but they don't have they have the ingredients. They haven't been able to put together a whole meal. And you have a guy like Finnegan who very clearly has plus stuff. I mean, when you watch him pitch in Detroit, you say, how does anyone hit this guy? This is a guy who had an ERA almost 4.5 this season before coming to Detroit. It just goes to show the team that acquires a player has a tendency to matter every bit as much, if not more, than the player itself. And him invest in the back end of that pen, that gives me a lot of hope for what could be an October run, because they're gonna have to use those guys a lot, and they're gonna have to be every bit as good as they've been since the trade deadline. Finnegan makes it through the entire month of August, does not give up a run. Impressive stuff. Tigers in a great place. All right, let's start it off. Let's kick it off. Hey, Michigan and Michigan State open their season with victories over the weekend. Michigan State obviously playing on Friday, which can I just, and I'll talk about this in a second. I'm very traditionalist when it comes to college football, and I understand Michigan State's been playing that Friday game forever. I want to say, could be wrong about this, I want to say 2012, the Le'Veon Bell game against Boise State was the first time they did that, meaning that not including the COVID year, they've basically done it every season since then. I think it's dumb. It's not, no, let me take that back. It's not dumb in the sense that like Michigan State isn't getting eyeballs on it. I'm sure from a brand standpoint, it's good. I just, what's wrong with just kicking off on Saturday, playing week 1 on Saturday? I don't know why this gets my panties in a bunch so much. I don't like playing overseas games. I don't like week 0 games. I don't like Thursday games. College football is Saturday. God damn it. Nobody says, hey, we got to go to church. It's important on a Wednesday. No, the college football stadiums are our cathedrals. Anyway, I'll talk about Michigan State in a second. Let's talk about Michigan. They win 34-17 over New Mexico in a game that statistically was very lopsided. I would even refer to it as dominant. I think that there was a lot of discourse on social media, which what else is new with college football, about how Michigan looked. It was very much a first game, meaning that there were very much things that I appreciated and needed to see. There were things that I was somewhat disappointed with, and we'll discuss it. Obviously, Michigan started with the ball. Bryce Underwood comes into the game. I mean, that was really cool. It's like something out of a movie, right? I mean, he was as confident as ever, got the huge ovation just stepping onto the field. And it's going to be so tough evaluating Bryce Underwood. And I talked about this with Anthony Bellino, but I've talked about it on and off throughout the offseason, which is, he's going to be the first of his kind in the sense that when he struggles, and he will go through struggles because he's human, he'll be one of the first that we refer to as an overpaid quarterback. Now, I would argue quarterbacks and college athletes have probably been getting paid for a long time. He's just, the first where it's legal. And it's kind of funny to me because similar to baseball, when a guy signs a contract and we say, oh my God, that's just an insurmountable amount of money. That's ridiculous. And then 10 years later, it looks like nothing. Bryce Underwood's making what, $12 million? I'm sure in 3 years, we're going to look at that and say, wow, what a steal. They only got Bryce Underwood for $12 million. But for the time being, he is kind of a trailblazer. It is a groundbreaking move. He comes onto the field. And the reason I mentioned all that is just because all the money in the world doesn't buy you any confidence, and it can't really buy you any success. It's got to be proven on the field. And there is still a ton of pressure. He's the 4th true freshman quarterback to start at Michigan, and I am 100% certain he has far and away the most pressure on him of any true freshman that's ever started at the University of Michigan. I mean, Bryce Underwood stepped on campus as a national name. That's not easy. And his first test against New Mexico, I thought Bryce was great. I thought he was really awesome. 21 for 31, 250 yards, I think 51 maybe, 1 touchdown, no turnovers, no fumbles, no interceptions, not really that many forced throws. There was a few times where that rocket of an arm is going to run pretty hot, and he had a few overthrows, needs to work on his touch maybe a little bit, but as a whole, I thought ran the offense, brilliantly. He was efficient. And even beyond that, and it's something that I remember discussing when Michigan went from Cade McNamara to JJ McCarthy. Now, Cade was obviously better than any run of quarterbacks Michigan had a year ago, but it's just when you look at the ability and the things that it's very clear Bryce Underwood is capable of doing on a football field. The amount of wrinkles that you could add to this offense, the amount of plays that you can add to this playbook, Chip Lindsey has to be just salivating. I mean, the word that came to mind to me, and again, I understand it's New Mexico, but the word that came to mind to me was trust, just because I understand 5-star recruit, number 1 ranked player in the country, all that. There's not a lot of coaches that would feel comfortable in a quarterback's first start multiple times having a right-handed quarterback roll out to his weak side and make a throw to the hash marks. Now, it wasn't always completed, right? But the point, you understand the point I'm trying to make, which is that there's clearly a trust that they have in Bryce Underwood to be able to go out and make plays, a trust that they have for him to make throws to limit the mistakes that they simply did not have a year ago. I mean, they had to keep the car in the garage a year ago, and I would argue they didn't even have a car. It was more of a rickshaw, right? Now you have a legitimate Ferrari in Bryce Underwood. And I thought, honestly, even though Michigan ended up winning by 17, you look at where this game was, it was getting a little bit dicey there for a second. And he made a throw on 3rd and 14 when, Todd Blackledge was saying, they're probably just going to run the ball and punt it away. He delivered a strike that honestly kind of turned the game around. That 2-minute drill at the end of the first half was just, that was huge for his confidence, huge for the momentum of the game. So as a whole, flying colors for Bryce Underwood in his first start as a Michigan Wolverine. And I said this in the post-game video, but I feel good about Bryce Underwood being able to go into a brutal environment in Norman next week and winning the game. Okay, like my concern level with Bryce is relatively low. That doesn't mean he's going to play perfect, but if we get the same version of Bryce Underwood that we got on Saturday against New Mexico, I think Michigan's going to have a really good shot. They need to be better in other areas, but there were many games a season ago where, by many, I mean 13 of them, in which you had to game plan around the fact that the forward pass was not an option. That is in the rear view. Okay, Bryce is going to be able to make his throws. He's going to be able to utilize his receivers. I also thought Chip Lindsey's play calling and the way that they utilized their pass catchers was a night and day difference compared to where it was a year ago. I understand last year's receiving core was subpar, not including, Colston Loveland, right, who was a tight end. In fact, it was one of the weakest in college football, at least of the Power Four. At the same time, there's athletes here. Samaj Morgan's an athlete. I know that they've added guys in the portal and everything, and very rarely a year ago did it feel like they ran plays where they were effectively getting the ball to their playmakers. Khalil Mullings, I felt like it was the only guy, and Colston Loveland were the only 2 players where it felt like they knew how important it was to get those guys the ball. Even Mullings would go long stretches where he wasn't the starting back. First play of the season, they just throw a little bubble screen to Samaj Morgan. He gets 11 yards. You know what? Samaj Morgan is fast as shit. Good. Give him the ball in space. When you watch Ohio State, they get angry at their quarterbacks when they don't throw to Jeremiah Smith, right? Like they are trying to do everything possible to make sure that they get the ball in their playmakers' hands. I thought Chip Lindsey did a wonderful job of that. And beyond the quarterback play, there's a return to basics. They ran the ball effectively. I will say I don't think the offensive line was maybe as good as the numbers indicate it to be. They got 3 long runs from Justice Haynes that inflated those numbers. But hey, they opened up holes for him that led to those home run plays. Haynes looked awesome. And, I think this is going to be a really dynamic running back room. And in game 1, it was Justice Haynes getting all the shine, 3 touchdowns, the long runs. There's going to be games where it's going to be Jordan Marshall. They're going to go with their hot hand. They feel good about these running backs as well as they should. That was a phenomenal first effort. I mean, they came into the game so strong. They scored 2 touchdowns early. You got Bryce Underwood lowering his shoulder and laying out a block, and it looks like Michigan was going to kind of run away with this thing. And it's where, people might roll their eyes at. I have to give Jason Eck and New Mexico, that staff, actually a fair amount of credit. They played hard and they played to win. And while I understand New Mexico as a program hasn't been anything special, this is a guy who comes over from Idaho with a ton of transfers. I bet that's probably at least going to be a bowl team. Like I felt like they played pretty solid, as well as they could have played against a team that has more talent at legitimately every position. And I felt like they adjusted because in the early part of this game, it felt like New Mexico was 1, trying to get the ground game going, and 2, trying to get pass plays going downfield. And the fact is their front could not handle Michigan's front. And so what they did, they knew of the fact that there was going to be pressure. They threw a lot of short passes, and they were able to establish a few drives. And I thought their quarterback, despite the interceptions, actually played a relatively good game. I'm frustrated, and this is where my criticisms come in. I'm frustrated that Michigan's defense was unable to adjust to their adjustment. Maybe it was because they had such a big lead. Maybe it was because at points they were kind of playing with backups. But for a period there, at the end of the first half and into the second half, New Mexico was sustaining drives. And that was something that was a prediction I was wrong about. Because one thing I said, I didn't make a score prediction, but I did say I don't see New Mexico scoring a bunch. I think that they're not going to be able to sustain many drives. Well, they were able to, and they were able to drive down the field, and they called a few trick plays, and they pulled a few rabbits out of their hat, as you have to do in a game like this on the road against Michigan. I thought they played them relatively tough. Michigan made some very characteristic first game mistakes, not just characteristic for Michigan, but characteristic for a lot of programs that you see throughout college football. This was a 34-17 game, and as I mentioned, statistically, Michigan kind of dominated, but you had a fumble by a true freshman on a kickoff return. That was a guaranteed 3 points. And look, you can't erase that, right? But I would imagine as this team grows throughout the season, they're going to limit those mistakes. So all of a sudden, instead of 34-14, it's 34-17. You also had a controversial drive in which you had a long conversion that probably wasn't. And then even before that, you had a targeting call. Just frustrating. And Michigan's going to appeal that. And that's huge. As a whole, I think I don't know why I haven't thought about this more. Maybe it's finally affected my team. The whole idea of the players got to be out the first half the next week. Wait, this isn't soccer where if you get a yellow card in back-to-back games, it becomes a red card. Like, that makes no sense to me. Like, and I also think, and I'm not the first person to point this out, the targeting conundrum in college football and in football as a whole needs some tinkering. You know, when you hear that word, the phrase targeting, right? Targeting a player. That's the stuff that needs to be avoided. It's guys who are leading with the crown of their helmet intentionally. It's the Vontaze Burficts of the world, these guys who see somebody with a head and just have this sudden urge to want to remove it from their body. That needs to be taken out of the game. I totally empathize with that. I'm all for player safety. At the same time, this is a fast-moving game. And in the instance like what happened with Barnum on that play, I don't know of many players who rushing the quarterback in that instance with the speed that they were going at would have the wherewithal to think, okay, well, let me just turn my head a little bit and lower. I don't know. Maybe I'm copping out because it is the team that I'm rooting for. Again, not reinventing the wheel. I don't understand why there isn't like a targeting 1 and targeting 2 the way that there are flagrant 1 and flagrant 2s in college basketball. You know, I think it's pretty easy at this point to tell when a player is intentionally leading with the crown of their helmet, intentionally trying to headhunt, right? Those things are easy to spot, and replay exists for those reasons. But in an instance like that, I saw no malicious intent, you know, and because of that, I think it's silly that a player not only is ejected from the game like he's committed some sort of crime, but has to miss the first half of what's going to be a pretty big game in Norman next week against Oklahoma. Bring that up, obviously, because that was New Mexico's best drive of the game. I have a hard time saying the refs gifted them 7 points. Like, you could have stopped New Mexico when you wanted, but they didn't, you know. And so the point I'm trying to make is that there were multiple instances in which I felt like New Mexico found a way to make it a little bit closer than maybe the score sheet indicated. Michigan did force several turnovers. I think 3 turnovers. TJ Guy with an unbelievable interception. I mean, adjusting to that ball at the D line to pull one in. That was great to see. But it did remind me of some of the frustrations that I had with last year's defense, which is they were dominant against the run, as they were again on Saturday. And while so much of it we chalked up to the Will Johnson and Rod Moore injuries, Rod Moore did not play against New Mexico, presumably will be back against Oklahoma. You know, this was a defense that struggled a fair amount against the pass last year. And obviously they, for whatever reason, were able to figure it out and fix it against Ohio State and Alabama. But, you know, this is a secondary that does not, outside of Rod Moore, doesn't have a ton of experience. That's going to go through some growing pains. And I think we saw that on full display on Saturday. It just scares me because if you're seeing kind of, you know, lapses and broken tackles and lack of discipline against New Mexico, it scares me what's going to happen when they go to Oklahoma, quite frankly. But yeah, I'm probably a little bit more positive than other people are about this opening game. Simply because when you look back at last season, average quarterback play gets them to 10 wins. They had 8, right? And it probably even more than that. I mean, I'm saying that they lose to, they would have lost to Oregon. They would have lost to Texas. After that, I mean, who knows who they would have lost to, honestly, if they would have just had average quarterback play. You're going to have well above average quarterback play. And if we're impressed with Bryce Underwood now, this is a guy who's going to get better as the season goes along. I guess just what has me concerned, and it's something that goes back to last season as well, is during the Harbaugh era and the heart of the Harbaugh era, the attention to detail and the discipline on these teams was just immaculate. The 23 team, which is going to, whether fair or not, going to be the standard that every Michigan football team from now until the end of time has to live up to, they never got penalized, man. They never made mistakes. And it's annoying in a game like New Mexico to see guys lining up in the neutral zone, the defensive holding penalties, pass interferences. These things are preventable, and they're things that you can get away with against lesser competition. When you get into the Big Ten season, or hell, even when you get into next week, I don't know if they're going to be able to bounce back from those mistakes. So there's definitely things to clean up, but in so many ways, all I needed to see was an offense that looked human, and it did. I mean, last year was, I'd call it like pulling teeth. It was like, pulling teeth without anesthesia. It was like pulling your own tooth. This will be a more efficient, more explosive offense, and that excites me. Does it mean that they can go to Oklahoma next week and win? I don't know. Look, off the top of my head, I'd say probably no. It's a loss, but I think it's a very welcome challenge. I think in a lot of ways, Michigan's playing with house money. If Brent Venables loses this game, Oklahoma's kind of in shambles. They're already not crazy about the guy. They've already taken steps backwards as a program. This is a night game, national TV at home. They're going to be favored. They expect to win. Michigan's coming in with a true freshman quarterback making his first road start, right? If you win this game, and we've seen this happen here in Michigan in the past, all of a sudden you are the darlings of September. Right, you have pulled an upset. Bryce Underwood's going to be, I mean, do they even, no disrespect, do they print like actual Sports Illustrated anymore? But he'll be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He'll be all over every magazine and every, like every YouTube video. People will be talking about him. Is it possible? September Heisman, all that stuff. So it's a unique opportunity, because very rarely at a program like Michigan are you going to be the underdog. And I hope, like they did against Ohio State a year ago, Michigan embraces that opportunity. I do think it'll be a game. I don't see this being like the Texas game a year ago where they come out and they just get steamrolled. I think they're going to make it competitive. I do think the defense will play better. And ultimately, if they force the turnovers that they forced against New Mexico and give Bryce some short fields, take the crowd out of the game, it could be a completely different story. So I'm not necessarily saying that I expect great things, but it's hard not to look forward to it. It's a match between two ranked opponents in the middle of September. All right, let's look on the other side of things. Michigan State won their season opener on Friday night against Western Michigan, 23-6, in a game that truly was a tale of two halves. Michigan State dominated the first half. Aiden Childs looked efficient. The receiving core looked quite good. They were tougher, better at the line of scrimmage. Second half, I don't really know what happened. You got 2 points. Those both came defensively, as you got a safety. The offense kind of stalled out. My takeaway from the Michigan State game, and it's going to be kind of boring, I guess, is that I came away from that ball game feeling no better or worse about Michigan State's season. I think that this is going to be an average team. I felt like they looked like an average team on Friday. I think it's an average team that's going to have moments in which they're going to be explosive and they're going to show a lot of promise. I thought Shiles looked a lot better. This receiving core, look, they have speed there. And Marsh is going to be a go-to guy for a long time. And they've added some weapons. And I did think the ground game in the first half looked significantly better. That's all a major positive. It's just, and I feel like this is such easy analysis, what I'm about to say. But I watch a lot of college football, watch a lot of Big Ten football. And it's just, when you see, the horses and the dudes that some of these programs are featuring, especially in the trenches. Game 1 against Western Michigan, I'm not gonna kill them for it. It still does not appear like Michigan State has caught up quite yet with that competition. And I think it's a big reason why you found the offense kind of stalling out at points in the second half. I understand that Michigan football can get annoying with how traditional their play calling can be, but when Michigan football is at their best, they will wear you down in the trenches. And by the end of the game, you got guys on the D line with hands on hips, and Michigan's popping off for 5, 6, 7 yards a carry. I think That is ultimately the goal of what Jonathan Smith wants here. But you also, he knows this as a head coach, you got to play to your strengths. The strength of this team, I don't believe, is going to be their offensive line. I think it's going to be their quarterback play. I think it's going to be spreading out the field. I think it's going to be getting the ball to their speedy receivers. And I think that they can have a lot of success with that. Honestly, not to a point where I think they're going to be winning 10 games, but you have enough playmakers, regardless of how undersized you might be, you can cause some issues. I mean, in the past, how many times, not so much anymore, but how many times in the past did we see spread attacks with short, fast receivers just kill teams from the Big Ten, especially Michigan State, right? That, it was very consistent running quarterbacks. Like, I think that this is an area where Michigan State can definitely improve and even thrive at points this season. But there was zero wow factor to their win against Western Michigan. I think that this game, as I've talked about for several weeks, and Matt Sheehan brought it up on Chris and Company as well, I think this upcoming game against Boston College is a boy, oh boy, it's too whatever to call it a defining game for Jonathan Smith. I don't think if Jonathan Smith wins this game, we're going to look back and say, oh man, it all started with Boston College. At the same time, you are going up against an opponent that you lost to a year ago. Now, of course, much different situation. Thomas Castellanos is now the quarterback at Florida State, beat Alabama this weekend. He's no longer at BC, but it's home game. You are going to be favored. It is a legitimate opponent. And I think that in a lot of ways, the scales will tip one way or the other this season based on how they perform in this game. I think that if they win this game, and let's say they win it comfortably, let's say it's 27-10, 27-13, and Michigan State, it's never really in doubt. I think that there will be people that say, hey, this team might actually be a little bit better than we expect. If they struggle or, God, even lose the game, I think that the possibility of them finishing towards the bottom of the Big Ten becomes a legitimate thing. You should, in year 2 of Jonathan Smith, you should be winning a home game against Boston College. And people might say that's critical. I don't think there's even any legit Michigan State fans who disagree with that take. So look, they have weapons. But having weapons is one thing. I just don't know if they have the horses. We're going to have to find that out. And I think a good test will be this weekend against Boston College. I got to talk about the Lions real quick, or I guess it's more Lions adjacent. Obviously, Detroit starts their season this weekend against the Green Bay Packers. The fresh revamped Green Bay Packers, who sent shockwaves throughout the football world after they acquired linebacker Micah Parsons from the Dallas Cowboys last week. It kind of changed everything, changed gambling odds. People are now picking the Packers to win the division. People are picking the Packers to go to the Super Bowl. The way I stand on it is a surprising, gutsy, and uncharacteristic move for the Green Bay Packers. In my lifetime, Green Bay is often they're the franchise that builds from within. They're not, because not only did they trade for Parsons, they extended him right away. I mean, that was always one of the big complaints when Rodgers was there, was like, why don't you go out and get free agent wide receivers? Why don't you go out and get free agent playmakers? It's just never really been their MO. This is a huge move. Regardless of how you feel about the Lions or the way the rest of this season is going to shape up, it's a big punch for Green Bay. And it will cause the Lions to have to make some adjustments twice a season as they go up against Micah Parsons and the Green Bay Packers. My whole thing with Green Bay, and I don't mean to make this a Green Bay podcast for one episode, but look, any team that has Micah Parsons on it immediately gets better. But the concerns or the question marks I have with Green Bay run a lot deeper, which is, one, Matt LaFleur is the James Franklin of the NFL. He doesn't win big games, and people don't talk about this. They had a million opportunities to gain ground in their division last year, couldn't do it. They won a playoff game, ironically, against the Cowboys when they had Micah Parsons, beat the crap out of them, right, in that one game. Besides that, they've lost every meaningful divisional game. They've lost every other meaningful playoff game, right? I mean, they lost, this is pre-Jordan Love, obviously, but they lost at home, Aaron Rodgers against the Bucs. Next year at home against they lost to Jimmy G and the 49ers in the postseason, right when they had home field advantage all throughout the NFC playoffs. I think that's something to focus on. As good of a playmaker as he is and as well-respected as he is, you got to get over the hump. And secondly, with Green Bay, jury's still out to me on Jordan Love. People forget how pedestrian Jordan Love looked last season at points. I think it was Nick Wright who brought this up. Against playoff teams a year ago, Jordan Love, 13 touchdowns, 12 picks. Did not play well in the playoff game against the Eagles. In fact, the Eagles, as unbeatable as they looked in those last several games, did not play their best game against Green Bay. You get an A-plus effort from Jordan Love, we're probably talking about a different result. And so as wonderful as Micah Parsons is, I have full faith in Dan Campbell and the rest of the division to be able to adjust to him. I don't have as much faith in the headliners in Green Bay. And that's why I still don't have them winning the division. In fact, I don't even have them finishing second in the division. I think the Vikings are in a very good place right now. So it's a welcome challenge. Here's the one area where I do feel like it warms the cockles of my heart a little bit. Teams now have to make moves to counterbalance how talented Detroit is. I like that. Makes me feel good. It should make you feel good. Not to say that teams aren't necessarily afraid of Detroit, but they sure as hell know what Detroit is capable of. And what they're able to do with the offensive weapons they have. And Green Bay sees a division that has 3, potentially 4 really good teams in it and says, we have to make a serious upgrade. And if there's one coaching staff that I know is, and one group of players that I know is going to be totally open to the challenge, it's going to be Dan Campbell's squad. So I'm really looking forward to it. All right, y'all. Good show today. Good show today, everybody. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter. Follow me on TikTok. We had a huge increase in TikTok followers over the weekend after the Michigan football postgame. I am confident we can get to 10K by the end of the year. Hopefully even go beyond that. Appreciate all your support. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We're available in audio form on Spotify. And of course, CastellaniContent.com is getting updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. If you want, it's an archive of Michigan football videos, Tiger videos, Lions videos. I'll say this episode's Chris and Company episodes. It's really, really exciting stuff that we put together there. And I know that there are people sometimes that reach out, believe it or not, and say, God, I remember that one video you did about this, or could I find this? It's all there. So I appreciate it. And of course, Austin Sisler, the artist behind the lens, who continues to do a wonderful job producing this show and continues to do a wonderful job with our product. I really believe in what we're doing. I appreciate all your support. This is a wonderful, wonderful time of year for sports and sports in Michigan especially. So stick with us. We got a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe. We do have a Chris and Company this week. I haven't quite locked up the guest yet, though we're close, so I'm not going to say who it is, as to avoid putting pressure on my potential guest. But we will be back with that, and I'm looking forward to chatting it up. So appreciate all you guys, and Austin does as well. I'll talk to you again real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.